Morning, everyone. Welcome back to the continuing YouTube series. This YouTube is actually more of a class that's going to be in two parts, one this week and hopefully one next week, and it's concerning Megillas Ruth, the book of Ruth, which is the book that's read on the second day of Shavuot. And so you have to understand first why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuot. And it talks about the acceptance of the Torah, the accepting of the yoke of commandments. But what I want to start out with is where we get an idea of how this works. Megillat Ruth, the story of Ruth, in and of itself is a separate book. But it's also a subtext of the book of Shoftim, of the book of Judges. Now, we see much of Ruth's story in Judges and Shoftim, but in the book of Ruth itself, concerning her life, it progresses along a distinctly different trajectory and produces a vastly different conclusion. The whole story of Ruth and the fact that her family, who stays in Moab, who's born in Moab, and that's where she's born, and the family she marries into, which is coming to Moab from the land of Israel, this union is an odd one. For in simple fact, the family in Israel that goes down to Moab, that goes down to the land of Moab, leaves Israel because there's a problem with food in Israel. So they're going to go to Moab to get food. But there's an issue with that because the family that Ruth is going to marry into, the leadership of that family that goes down to Moab, dies in Moab, with the exception of Naomi. With the exception of Naomi. And they die in Moab because, you see, the greatest amount of wealth was in that leadership. There was wealth of money, of food, of power, all these things. And rather than share it with the people that were in need and staying in the land of Israel, he chose to go down to the land of Moab, using the excuse to go get food and to live in a way that would be more possible and easier than the challenging life in Eretz Yisrael at the time. Of course, we understand that Ruth marries Boaz, and there's a great deal of age difference between the two, but Ruth marries Boaz, and Boaz is a possible solution to the leadership failure in the book of Shoftim, in the book of Judges. When we examine Megillas Ruth as a whole, it functions as a solution for the prevalent social decay of the time in which she lives. Rav Soloveitchik, Zatzal, of blessed memory, he writes in this way, he says, Megillat Ruth's portrayal of a harmonious and peaceful lifestyle is a welcome contrast to the violent and warring atmosphere in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim. It is especially different from the chaos and the anarchy depicted in the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges, of Shoftim. And when we contrast these two books, Shoftim and Ruth, Ruth presents an alternative to the discord that holds sway in the book of Shoftim. So what are some of the parallels? Let's look at what are some of the parallels that connect the two. Well, there are language parallels in the Hebrew. We won't go into those in too much depth at all, but the thematic parallels are what are really important. The parallels in the theme underscore the deliberate contrast between them. And so, as we compare the book of Ruth to Shoftim, such as comparing Devorah and Shimshon, the prophetess Devorah and the judge Shimshon, you have to just look at primary comparisons of contrast and loyalty. The first two parallels surround the topics of loyalty and food. And in Shoftim there is a violent conclusion, and in Ruth there's a tranquil ambiance. So let's look here. Let's start out with saying, due to the failure of the leadership to achieve its goal of national cohesiveness, of putting the two together, the society in the book of Judges, in the book of Shoftim, steadily splinters off into smaller units. Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, are spread apart. There is an increasing awareness that the nation is naturally divided into tribal and even smaller familial entities. Simply put, just as Jews are divided into smaller entities today and smaller denominations, as opposed to what we once called streams of Judaism, the same existed then. And as that national entity splits and divides again and again and again, you would think it creates more numbers, but in fact, what it does do is it causes a lack of coherence. It causes people to naturally revert to their basic allegiances with increasingly narrower frames of loyalty. Their first loyalty is to themselves. The next loyalty is to their family, then their extended family, then their tribe, then maybe a national unity of people. But before any of that happens, the earlier model of the unity between the tribes, a single tribe, the unity of the families in the tribe, that model creates and puts together infighting, and eventually turns out to be a civil war. This is what ultimately happens between the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel. And it's happening today as well, among Jews of Israel and Jews of the United States, among Jews of different streams, Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, Orthodox, Modern Orthodox, Neo-Orthodox, Hasidism, and different sects within Hasidism. So that factional picture of a nation is what we're looking at, and that's what exists in Shoftim, and in my opinion, much of that exists today. The poetry in the Song of Devorah, of the judge Devorah, of the woman in which she lists the tribes separately, praising those tribes who joined the national war effort and castigating those tribes who do not join the war effort. Gideon is depicted rallying first his family unit and secondly his tribal unit. Only then does he call upon other regional tribes to join his war. The situation worsens under the leadership of Avimelech, who splits his own family into two irreconcilable factions. His mother's kin, who become his allies, and his father's kin, whom he massacres. Having been thrown out of his father's house, Yiftach seems to have no loyalties to anyone at all, not even his daughter. This deteriorating situation reaches its nadir in the narrative of Shimshon, of Samson, who rallies no tribe to war and acts as a leader of no one. Primary loyalties. Now, we haven't even touched on Ruth yet, where we will find also issues of primary loyalty. The predominance of primary loyalties generates several divisive situations in which tribes clash with one another. How often is it today that brothers don't speak to one another, brothers and sisters don't speak to one another, parents don't speak to one another? It's a sad situation that we're living in. the lack of communication among one generation to the next, of cross generations. This is the challenge that exists today, and it existed thousands of years ago as well. Loyalty. And what happens? Civil war. Gidon narrowly averts a civil war with the tribe of Ephraim. Yiftach is not prudent enough to avoid a civil war. The war between Yiftach and the people of Ephraim leave 42,000 people of Ephraim dead. And finally, the conflict between the tribe of Binyamin and the rest of the nation spirals into full-scale civil war, whose repercussions are nothing short of catastrophic. Perhaps it is for this reason that Megillas Ruth focuses upon the unanticipated and unconditional loyalty to one's family. Ruth says in Sefer Ruth very clearly, in Megillas Ruth, very clearly to her mother-in-law, Naomi, your people are my people, I'll go where you'll go. Her loyalty to her mother-in-law transcends any familial, tribal, or national primary loyalties. Remember this, that Ruth is a Moabitess. She is a princess of Moab. She is not just some simple Moab woman. She is a princess. She in no way focuses on her narrow interests. She unhesitatingly offers her fidelity to Naomi, declaring her unequivocal allegiance to a woman with whom she has no binding family ties. I guess I should probably put in a mother-in-law joke here, but I can't. Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law, and Ruth has greater love and respect and honor for her mother-in-law than she does for anyone in her own tribe, in her own people, in the people of Moab. What's interesting is that Naomi is surprised by Ruth's devotion, urging Ruth to go back to her father's home, urging her to go back to her people. Boaz, kin to Naomi, also expresses his surprise at Ruth's actions, praising Ruth for leaving her father and mother and homeland to follow Naomi to Beit Lechem. Just like Avram Avinu, just like Abraham, our father, our patriarch, as he's commanded, Lech lecha mi'artzecha mimoladetcha mibeit avicha el artz asher ha'eka, as he's commanded by God, go from your land to a place that I'm going to show you, so does Ruth do the same. Ruth's assertion is all-embracing and inclusive. As I said earlier, your nation is my nation, your God is my God. She, the foreigner, guided by compassion and untainted by the prevailing blight of primary loyalties, can guide a nation back to unity and to a willingness to set aside personal interests. It is this quality that enables Ruth to create a monarchy that can unify the nation under one national banner, healing the tribal divisions that have split the fragile nation. As I said earlier, it goes all the way back to food. Naomi's family leaves Eretz Yisrael because they believe that there will not be enough food. And so they do not want to share what they have with others. So we look at food in both Shoftim and in Ruth. Examining the theme of giving and withholding food in each of these two books illustrates the striking contrast between them. There are several accounts in which the people of Bnei Yisrael, the people of the nation of Israel, withhold food from one another in the book of Shoftim. The people of Sukkot and Penuel refuse to give food to Gidon and his hungry, exhausted soldiers. There is a refusal to give an old man a place to stay and food to feed himself and his entourage and his animals. His assumption is that no one has invited him into their house because they did not wish to provide him with food. In the book of Shoftim and Judges, Am Yisrael has lost all semblance of social cohesiveness. Yes, we might be observing what we call social separation today due to COVID, but there is a sense of social cohesiveness. Am Yisrael lost that, along with the basic decency that compels people to offer food to those in need, something that we need to do today as well. The miserly attitude displayed in the book of Shoftim and Judges is the very antithesis of the foundations of the nation of Israel, a nation of chesed, a nation of loving kindness, founded by Avram, whose tent was always open to strangers. Despite Naomi's husband Elimelech's initial abandonment of the people of Beit Lechem during the famine, the book of Ruth records repeated situations in which the two main characters generally provide food for one another. Ruth goes into the fields to reap food for herself and for Naomi, and in an unanticipated display of personal compassion, Boaz himself hands Ruth grain, ensuring that she has food for lunch. And what does Ruth do? She saves her leftovers. She returns home and gives food to Naomi, her mother-in-law. And at the climax of the story, Boaz presents Ruth with 6 sheaves of barley, food given generously and unhesitatingly becomes a symbol of a society in which social cohesiveness and basic decency from its core makes these people special, and these people the heirs of Avram Avinu, of Abraham our father. Now, I'd like to close this first section of the discussion of Ruth with a simple statement concerning where she is and where we are in Shoftim. The fact that Megillas Ruth mirrors, converses with, and ultimately repairs the social collapse of the book of Shoftim of Judges is understood in the language between Ruth and the final disturbing narrative of the book of Shoftim. The book of Shoftim has great violence at the end in its darkest hour, with heinous behavior of all the characters involved. So much so that it would come close to echoing Sodom and the civil war that is byproduct of all these terrible behaviors. Megillas Ruth draws us to closing goodness in Ruth and in Naomi, and in those who surround themselves with her. We'll continue on in our next session concerning Ruth and Shoftim next week. Thank you.